Nope. The call came at 11:47 at night. I know the exact time because I had just checked my phone, staring at the screen in that hollow, useless way you do when you're waiting for news that hasn't come yet. My son Caleb had been in the ICU for 6 hours. 6 hours since the neighbor found him at the bottom of the ravine behind my in-laws' property, his bike twisted beneath him, his helmet cracked clean through. 6 hours since the paramedics told me his brain was swelling and they needed to relieve the pressure fast. 6 hours since my whole world collapsed into a single waiting room chair and a paper cup of cold coffee I never drank, and that was when my father-in-law called. I almost didn't answer. The number flashed across my screen and for a half second I thought it might be news about Caleb rerouted through the wrong contact. I picked up. Nathan. His voice was flat. Not worried. Not shaking. Flat the way it always was when he was about to tell me something I wasn't going to like. How's the boy? It wasn't even a question. He said it the way you'd ask about the weather. He's in surgery, I said. They're relieving pressure on his brain. They don't know yet if, right. A pause. I heard ice clinking in a glass. Listen, I'm calling because Diane is beside herself. You know, tomorrow's the anniversary dinner. 25 years. We've had the reservation at Hargroves for 3 months. I said nothing. I genuinely could not locate a single word in my body. She's asking if you can bring Caleb's overnight bag by the house before 9. She had his good clothes from last weekend, and she wants to make sure they get back to you since he's going to be there a while. He's in surgery, I said again. I heard you, Nathan. He might not walk again. They don't know of the swelling. I understand it's a difficult night. Another clink of ice. But Diane has been planning this dinner for months and she doesn't want the evening overshadowed. That's all I'm saying. Come by tomorrow before 9, pick up his bag, and we can all move forward. I hung up. I sat in that chair for a long time after that, staring at the wall. There was a child's drawing taped above the water fountain, a crayon sun with a smiling face, the kind Caleb used to make when he was 4. I remember thinking that if my son died tonight, I would never in my life speak to either of them again. And I remember thinking that even if he didn't die, something had already ended. Caleb is 8. He has my eyes, my late mother always said, though she meant it as a compliment, which I never quite understood because I've never liked my own eyes. He has his mother's laugh, loud and sudden like a door swinging open. And he has this thing he does when he's nervous, where he touches the back of his neck with 2 fingers, just taps it, once, twice, then stops. He's been doing it since he was 3. I don't know where he learned it. Maybe nowhere. Maybe it's just him. His mother, my ex-wife Joanna, had moved to Portland 2 years ago for work. We'd worked out a custody arrangement that was mostly civil, mostly because we'd both agreed that Caleb came before everything else. She'd been at a conference in Seattle the night of the accident. I'd called her the moment the paramedics arrived. She was already boarding a flight by the time I reached the hospital. She got there around 2 in the morning, still in the clothes she'd been traveling in. Her hair pulled back, her face the color of chalk. I stood up when she walked through the waiting room doors and she walked straight into me and held on, and we just stood there for a while, neither of us saying anything because there wasn't anything to say. The surgeon came out at 3:15. His name was Dr. Term, Okafor, and he had the kind of steadiness in his face that I later learned meant he had delivered news like this more times than any person should have to. He told us the surgery had gone well. The pressure was relieved. Caleb was stable. He was not out of danger, but he was no longer in immediate danger either. There would be tests in the morning. There was still the question of his left leg, which had taken the worst of the impact. There was still the question of his right hand, which had been trapped under the bike. There were things they wouldn't know until he was awake. But he was alive. Joanna put both hands over her face and made a sound I'd never heard from her before, something between a laugh and a cry, compressed into a single breath. I sat down on the floor, just sat down, right there in the hallway, because my legs had decided they were done. The nurses gave us a room to wait in, a small family lounge with a couch that pulled out into a cot and a television mounted high on the wall that played nothing but infomercials at that hour. Joanna fell asleep around 5. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in a plastic chair beside the window and watched the parking lot get light, and I thought about the ravine. My in-laws' property in Ashford sits on about 4 acres. My father-in-law, Gerald, bought it in the 90s when the land was cheap and spent the better part of a decade building it into something that looked impressive in photographs. There's a main house, a guest cottage, a pond, and at the far edge of the property, where the land drops away, a ravine, maybe 30 feet deep, rocky at the bottom with a narrow creek running through it. There's no fence. There had never been a fence. I'd asked about it twice in the years Joanna and I were married, both times when Caleb was old enough to start walking unsupervised, and both times Gerald had looked at me the way he always looked at me when I said something he considered beneath response. Caleb had been at the property for the weekend. Gerald and Diane had asked to have him for a long weekend, the kind of grandparent visit they did a few times a year. I dropped him off Friday afternoon. He'd been fine. Happy, even. He'd waved at me from the porch. The neighbor who found him, a man named Roy who lived on the adjoining lot, said he heard the sound from his backyard just after 7 in the evening. He'd been grilling. He described it as a crash and then nothing. No calling out, no sound at all after that. He'd gone to investigate, found Caleb at the bottom of the ravine, and called 911 immediately. He told the paramedics he'd tried to reach Gerald and Diane's house but got no answer at the door. They were at a fundraiser dinner in town. They had left Caleb alone. He was 8 years old. They had left him alone on a 4-acre property with an unfenced 30-foot ravine, gone to a fundraiser dinner, and not told me, not told Joanna, not told anyone. I didn't know this until the morning after the surgery, when a police officer named Hartley came to the hospital and sat down with me in a small office off the main corridor. He was maybe 50, with the kind of face that had been patient for a long time. He explained what they'd established so far. He explained that there were no other people present on the property when the accident occurred. He explained that they were looking into the circumstances further. I asked him what looking into the circumstances further meant. He said it meant they weren't finished yet. What he didn't tell me, what I found out 3 days later from Roy himself, who came to the hospital with flowers and a level of guilt in his face that I will never forget, was that Roy had seen Diane's car pull up the driveway approximately 40 minutes before Caleb was found. He'd thought nothing of it at the time. He thought they'd come back from wherever they'd been and that someone was with the boy. It was only later, talking to the police, that he'd mentioned it. And it was only later still, when the police pulled the security footage from the camera Gerald had installed at the entrance of the property, a camera he'd put up years ago to monitor deer. He always said that they found something that made the officer come back to the hospital to talk to me again. The camera had recorded Diane's white SUV entering the property at 6:49 p.m. It had recorded Caleb, visible in the upper corner of the frame near the back of the main house, on his bike. It had recorded the SUV moving, not toward the house, not toward the parking area, but along the back service track that ran parallel to the ravine's edge. The footage was not clear enough to show everything. The angle was wrong, but it showed enough. It showed Caleb moving fast, veering toward the edge, and then not being visible anymore. It showed the SUV stopping. It showed the SUV leaving. Diane had driven away. She had come home, seen what happened, or caused what happened, and driven away to the fundraiser dinner. I'm not going to describe what it felt like to hear that. There aren't words that fit inside a sentence for what that feels like. I'll say that I went into the family bathroom off the main corridor and stayed there for about 20 minutes, and that a nurse knocked on the door after a while and asked if I was all right, and that I said yes, because I didn't know what else to say. The police brought Diane in for questioning 2 days after that. Gerald hired a lawyer within the hour. The kind of lawyer whose name you recognize because his firm has a billboard on the interstate. Diane sat in a room with that lawyer and answered questions in the way that people answer questions when a lawyer is sitting next to them, which is to say, she answered very few of them. She said she had come home briefly. She said she had not seen Caleb near the ravine. She said she had assumed he was inside. She said she had left again because she had a prior commitment. The prior commitment was the fundraiser dinner. The fundraiser was for a pediatric hospital foundation. The district attorney's office reviewed the footage and the statements and the physical evidence and ultimately charged her with 1 count of criminal negligence and 1 count of failure to render aid. Not attempted anything, not reckless endangerment, not the things I'd spent 3 nights reading about on my phone at 2 in the morning, hands shaking, trying to understand what the law said about a woman who had driven away from her unconscious grandson lying at the bottom of a ravine. The lawyer negotiated. There was a plea. There was no prison time. There was a fine that, to Gerald and Diane, was the equivalent of a parking ticket. There was probation. There was a requirement to complete a community service program that, from what I later understood, she fulfilled by attending a series of Saturday morning sessions at a local food bank, which I'm sure the food bank appreciated, but which felt, to me, like something that had happened in a language I didn't speak. I want to be clear about something, because I've thought about it often and I think it matters. I don't know exactly what happened at that ravine's edge. I don't know if she drove too close and startled him and the bike went over and she panicked. I don't know if something worse happened. The footage didn't show me. The investigation didn't resolve it. What I know is that she drove away. What I know is that she went to a dinner. What I know is that she didn't call 911. She didn't call me. She didn't call Joanna. She didn't call anyone. She went to a dinner and Roy heard the crash from his yard and Caleb was at the bottom of a ravine for approximately 40 minutes before help arrived. 40 minutes. The doctors told me later that those 40 minutes mattered. Not catastrophically, not in the way that changed the ultimate outcome, but they mattered. Every minute of pressure on a child's brain matters. Caleb woke up on the 4th day. I was in the chair beside his bed, the same chair I'd been in for most of 4 days, when his eyes opened. It was early, just past 6 in the morning. Gray light through the window blinds, and I'd been half asleep with my head against the wall when I heard him make a sound. I sat up. His eyes were open, not wide, just open, blinking slowly at the ceiling. "Hey," I said. My voice came out wrong, too thick. He turned his head toward me. It took him a moment. I could see it taking effort, but he turned his head and he looked at me, and I watched him figure out who I was piece by piece, and then something in his face settled. "Dad," he said. It came out rough and small, barely sound at all. "Yeah, buddy." I moved closer. "I'm right here. I've been right here." He blinked. His right hand, wrapped in bandaging, moved slightly against the blanket. I put my hand over it carefully, just resting there. We stayed like that for a little while. The monitors beeped. Down the hall, someone was rolling a cart. I didn't call the nurse yet. I just stayed there, because he was awake and he knew me, and for a minute I needed that to just be the whole world. Then he said, "Grandma's car." I went still. "She was there," he said. "On the path." His voice was slow, like he was reading from something far away. "I saw her car coming and I went to the side and the wheel hit something and I went over." He stopped. His eyes moved to the ceiling again. "I called out," he said. "I called for her. I heard the car stop." Another pause. "She didn't come down." He turned his head back to me. "Did she call someone?" he asked. "Is that how they found me?" I looked at my son's face. 8 years old, bandaged hand, leg still in a brace, brain still healing, looking at me with those eyes he got from me, asking me a question that I did not know how to answer in a way that wouldn't break something in him. "Roy found you," I said. "The neighbor. He called 911. Caleb looked at me for a long moment. "Oh," he said quietly. He didn't ask any more questions that morning. He went back to sleep a little while later, and I sat in the chair and I looked at the wall and I thought about Diane at a fundraiser dinner with a glass of wine in her hand while Roy was pulling my son out of a ravine. I thought about Gerald calling me with ice clinking in his glass, asking about an overnight bag. I called my attorney the next morning. I filed for a formal modification of Caleb's custody arrangement that afternoon, specifically removing any provision for unsupervised visitation with Gerald and Diane. I also filed for a protective order. My attorney told me the standard was high for a protective order against grandparents. But given the documented evidence and the criminal proceedings, we had a reasonable case. Gerald called me 4 times the day the papers were served. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail on the 4th call that was 7 minutes long. I listened to it once. He used the word overreaction twice and the phrase, "You're destroying this family" once, which I found interesting given that his wife had driven away from his unconscious grandson and gone to dinner. I deleted the voicemail and blocked his number. Diane sent a card, an actual card, the greeting card kind, with a photograph of a sunrise on the front. Inside she had written, in her neat, even handwriting, that she was sorry for everything that had happened, and that she hoped Caleb would recover fully, and that she would always love him as her grandson. There was no acknowledgement of what she had done, no sentence that began with the word "I," followed by any version of the words "left" or "drove away" or "did not call." Just the sunrise and the neat handwriting and the love she would always have for my son, who had lain at the bottom of a ravine calling for her. I put the card in a folder in my filing cabinet. My attorney told me to keep everything. Caleb spent 11 days in the hospital. He came home with a walking brace on his left leg and a hand that the physical therapist said would take 6 to 8 months of work to regain full strength. He came home quieter than he'd left, which the hospital counselor told me was normal, which I understood intellectually and found devastating anyway. He came home and walked through the front door of our apartment and went straight to his room and sat on his bed and looked at his things for a while. The way you do when you've been away somewhere hard and you need to remind yourself that normal still exists. I ordered pizza. We sat on the couch and watched a movie he'd been wanting to see, some animated thing with a talking dog and a lot of jokes I didn't fully follow. Halfway through, he leaned against my arm. I didn't move. I didn't make a thing of it. I just stayed still and let him lean. The physical therapy was hard. He was stubborn about it. The good kind of stubborn, the kind that comes from having something to prove to yourself. His therapist, a woman named Deshanda who had the energy of someone who had seen every kind of difficult and had decided to find it interesting, told me after the third session that Caleb was one of the most determined kids she'd worked with. I told her I wasn't surprised. She said I should be proud. I was. I am. I am so proud of that kid that sometimes I can't hold it. It just sits in my chest too big for the space, and I have to find something to do with my hands. The custody modification was granted 6 weeks after I filed. The protective order was more complicated, but it held. Gerald attempted to contest the grandparent visitation restriction, which in our state he had some grounds to do, but my attorney had put together a thorough record and the judge took her time with it, and in the end she sided with me. I sat in that courtroom and listened to the ruling, and I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I was standing at the end of a very long hallway that had been dark for months, and someone had finally opened a door at the far end, and there was just light. Ordinary light. Nothing dramatic. Just the ability to see again. Joanna and I had dinner a few weeks after the ruling, just the two of us. Caleb had a sleepover with his friend Marcus. We sat at a restaurant near her hotel and talked for 3 hours, and it was the best conversation we'd had in years. Maybe since before everything fell apart the first time. She told me she'd had her own reckoning with her parents. That she'd confronted her mother on the phone. That the conversation had gone badly and ended in silence, and that she was still sitting with what that meant. I told her I understood. She said she knew I did. We're not getting back together. I want to be clear about that because I know that's the ending some people want. The tidy version where the crisis pulls the estranged couple back and everything closes in a bow. That's not this story. What we have now is something harder to name and more useful, I think. We're two people who are both entirely committed to the same 8-year-old boy, and we've stopped pretending that the other one is the obstacle. That's enough. It turns out that's actually quite a lot. Caleb asked me about his grandmother once, about 3 months after coming home. We were in the kitchen, he was doing homework at the table, and he looked up from his worksheet and said, without any particular lead-up, "Is Grandma Diane ever going to say sorry?" I put down what I was holding. I sat down across from him. "I don't know," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "Do you think she's sorry?" I thought about the sunrise card with the neat handwriting. I thought about the 7-minute voicemail with the word overreaction. I thought about the fundraiser dinner and the ice in the glass. "I think she might be sorry that things went the way they did," I said carefully. "I'm not sure that's the same thing as being sorry for what she did." He thought about this. He touched the back of his neck with 2 fingers, once, twice, then stopped. "Okay," he said, and he went back to his worksheet. I stayed at the table for a while, watching him work. That dark head bent over the paper, his braced leg stretched out to the side. His bandaged hand holding the pencil with the particular focus that still cost him something. He chewed his lip a little when he was concentrating. I'd forgotten that. I sat there and watched him chew his lip over a math problem, and I thought, this is what I almost lost. Not an idea of him, not a future version, not a memory. This exact boy at this exact table, with this exact pencil and this lip he chews when he's thinking. I don't know how you hold that. I'm still figuring it out. What I know is that the life we have now, the one we built from the rubble of 11 days of hospital chairs and court filings and a sunrise card I keep in a folder I never want to open again, is ours. Fully ours. Nobody else has access to it who doesn't deserve to be there. We eat dinner together 4 nights a week. We have a standing Saturday morning trip to the farmer's market, where Caleb always finds something strange to convince me to buy. Last week, a purple cauliflower the size of his head. The week before that, a jar of something the vendor called hot honey that we've now put on everything. He's back on his bike. A new one, smaller, with better grips. I watched him the first time he rode it down the sidewalk in front of our building. Watched his whole body remember how to balance. Watched the moment where the fear and the muscle memory made their negotiation, and he came out the other side just riding. Just a kid on a bike in the afternoon. I didn't say anything. I just watched. That was enough. That was everything. If you're reading this, and you have someone in your life who asks you to choose between being present for your child in a crisis and being convenient for them, I want you to understand something that took me a long time to say clearly. The people who love you, who actually love you, will never make you choose. They will be in that waiting room. They will be the second call you make, the one where you don't even finish the sentence before they're already asking what they can do. They will not call you about overnight bags. They will not talk about reservations. You do not owe family a definition they haven't earned. Caleb is doing well. His hand is at about 80%, which Jashonda says will become 90, and which I choose to believe. His leg is fully healed. He started a new school year last fall, and came home the first day with 3 new friends, and a story about a teacher who kept a fish named Senator. He told me the story at the dinner table with his whole face alive. Hands moving, voice climbing, that laugh that sounds like a door swinging open. I sat across from him and I ate my dinner and I listened and I did not take a single second of it for granted. I won't, not ever again.